Hi and welcome to this section on autoscaling. Let's move on to our first video, which is autoscaling deep dive. Now when we try to understand more about autoscaling, the first thing we have to consider is the launch configuration. So each autoscaling group is attached to one launch configuration. Now one important thing to note is that you can't change launch configuration after it has been created. So let's say that you have a new AMI. Remember the launch configuration, you specify the AMI. So let's say you already have a launch configuration in place, you have an autoscaling group in place, but now you want that autoscaling group to create instances based on a new AMI. So how can you assign it to the autoscaling group? So the way to go about this is to create a new launch configuration and then assign it to the autoscaling group. The next thing that needs to be considered is the cooldown period. So the cooldown period ensures that the previous scaling activity takes effect properly. So let's take a use case scenario. Let's say you have an autoscaling group which already has two instances already defined. Now let's say the CPU threshold for this two has been reached, an alarm has been triggered, and a scaling out happens. Now before the entire setup can settle down, so let's say that from 2 it becomes 3, but the alarm is triggered again before the instance the new instance can start. Now if you have another instance which gets launched during this time before even the entire application can settle down, then that's a problem. So you always have this cooldown period wherein during this time, if any alarm gets triggered by the setup, the auto-scaling group will actually not take that into account. So let's say you define a cooldown period of 5 minutes. So when a new instance is launched as part of a scaling activity, what's going to happen is that auto-scaling group will give 5 minutes for the entire setup to settle down. If an alarm is triggered beyond that, then yes, in order to ensure that the scaling out activity happens, another instance will be launched. Then you can also suspend and resume auto-scaling processes. So for example, the different sort of processes such as launch, terminate, and the add to load balancer, all of these processes can be suspended at a particular point in time. You can also suspend and resume the health check process. So let's just go to the AWS console. I just want to show you the aspects where all of these implementations are possible. So here I am in the EC2 dashboard. I have an autoscaling group in place. Now if you look at the details tab of the autoscaling group, if you go on to actions and if you go on to edit, here is where you can change a lot which is part of the autoscaling group. So if you want to change the launch configuration, you can do it over here. So I did mention that in the slides that if you want, let's say you have a new AMI, so you want your instance which is launched as part of the autoscaling group to be having that new AMI, you can do that by creating a new launch configuration and then making sure that the autoscaling group uses this new launch configuration. If you go down, you can also have these suspended processes. So let's say you want to suspend the terminate process. So you don't want that instance to be terminated or the scale in. You can add it as a suspended process. So now autoscaling will not terminate your EC2 instances. And then I mentioned about the cooldown period. So currently by default, it's 5 minutes. So depending upon the amount of time that your application architecture needs in order to cool down after a scaling activity, ensure the right time is specified over here. So this is where you can do a lot of configuration when it comes to the auto-scaling group.